Well, it's been too long since we checked in on our friend, Professor Alon Burstein. He's the host of the Israel-Palestine Report on YouTube. I think I've seen you on TikTok recently, too. We can get into that at the end of the interview. Lots to discuss, Alon. It's been an incredibly busy couple of weeks. You and I were talking offline specifically about the UN Security Council. We're going to be getting to that in a moment. By the way, a live look at the region as we continue to track the latest on Gaza. Let's talk about Israeli-Saudi normalization to start off, Alon. We learned last week that if the U.S. wants to sell F-35 fighter jets to Saudi Arabia, Israel reportedly wanted that sale to be conditioned on Israel and Saudi Arabia normalizing relations. We have since learned this week that the U.S. will, in fact, sell those jets to the Saudis. So, Alon, has there been any significant discussion about them normalizing their relations? Has Israel reacted directly to the F-35 deal?
It's good to see you, Austin. Like most of the things that are part of the relationship right now between the United States and Israel, Trump is going forward with whatever he thinks should happen in the Middle East. Israel, at best, is saying, yes, that's great. At worst, is simply not responding. When the UN Security Council passed a resolution pertaining to Gaza, which maybe we'll talk about a little later, and this was something that Israel did not want passed that way. Israel said, that sounds great. Yes, it's wonderful. Anything Trump says goes. When it came to the sale of F-35s and 300 advanced tanks and declaring Saudi Arabia a major non-NATO ally, all these things, Israel's staying silent. It doesn't want to say yes. It really doesn't like that. It also cannot say no to Trump, and Trump knows this. And it's one of the reasons that he's sort of letting himself, so to speak, go forward with these different plans in the Middle East and always assuming that Israel's going to just say yes, because in fact, Israel is always just saying yes. Israel, in order for Netanyahu to sell this to his coalition and say it's okay, we don't need to get upset at this. For years, Israel has relied on having air superiority in the Middle East, and we saw the critical importance of that with the war with Iran. We've seen that with Yemen. We've seen that with all kinds of regional actors. Right now, Saudi Arabia is cooperating with Israel, but Israel's afraid. What happens if the kingdom falls in 10 years and all of a sudden they have these weaponries? So with that, Israel for years has wanted to ensure the United States does not sell such advanced weaponry to the Middle East. Now it's in the position where Netanyahu just wanted to get something from Saudi Arabia to say, well, don't worry because we're going to have normalized relations. It hasn't gotten that. It got some statements that Saudi Arabia would like to join the Abraham Accords. So Saudi Arabia is openly talking about that, but saying still it conditions this on a Palestinian state along the 1967 borders, something that certainly Netanyahu's government, but Israel more broadly, has made clear it's not going to agree to. So theoretically, Israel, is making a lot of statements that they would like to see this come alongside some sort of normalization agreement, but is not being directly critical of what's happening. I will say, if this was the Biden administration or a Harris administration, we'd likely see Israel screaming and furious. Under the Trump administration, Israel is simply either saying yes to anything he says or not saying anything.
So what would be the significance of Israel and the Saudis normalizing relations? What would be the most meaningful changes that both countries would see?
If this were to go down that path, and again, it's very, very difficult to see a scenario where that happens without some sort of concrete steps towards a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But if, hypothetically, we were to see that happening, we would likely see two very big geopolitical changes regionally and internationally. Firstly, like when Israel signed a peace treaty with Egypt in 1979, this brought about massive retaliations against Egypt from the Arab world, but also started to open a door. There were other elements within the Arab world. It took 10 years, it took a little longer. They started to say, if Egypt can do it, maybe we can. Saudi Arabia is a leading country. It wants to be the most leading country, and some would argue that it is the most leading country in the Islamic world, certainly in the Sunni Islamic world. If they were to go down that path, we would likely see a big split in the Islamic world. Many of the more moderate countries might be inclined to also go down that path, as if Saudi Arabia can do it, we can do it. We would equally at the same time see other regimes, such as Afghanistan under the Taliban, such as different regimes, or at least some state actors, certainly in Nigeria, some of them in Pakistan, some of them in Uzbekistan, that would see this as such a big betrayal that likely would lead to also inflammatory reactions within the Islamic world. That's on Saudi Arabia's side. On Israel's side, we would see, first of all, a major political victory against Saudi Arabia as a huge country. It also would have vast economic potential for Israel. Israel, I remind you, has a very hard time with the supply of oil, which comes from Arab countries, most of whom Israel does not have relations with, so it ends up buying oil through third-party countries. It would be a major victory politically for Israel, whatever administration would manage to push that through. It would be Netanyahu or someone else. We would also likely see a vast increase in cooperation when it comes to addressing regional problems. I say addressing, not solving, because if we see now open cooperation between Israel and Saudi Arabia with regards to, for example, the situation in Yemen, or with situations Sudan and South Sudan, Somalia, let alone Gaza and Lebanon. If we would see those changes and Israel were to openly cooperate with Saudi Arabia, that would have vast implications for that too. Now, obviously, there's the third actor that's involved here, the United States. For the United States, this would honestly remove a big headache. Within the Middle East, Israel has been the United States' closest ally, certainly for several decades. But the United States has also been a very close ally of Saudi Arabia, also a very close ally of Qatar, also a very close ally of other countries that at times have viewed Israel as an enemy, at times have viewed Israel as at least someone who you don't talk to. And this has caused the United States headaches. It caused them headaches during the first Gulf War in '91. It caused them headaches during the second Gulf War. They're allied with Israel and they're allied with these other countries that are all Muslims attacking each other. So it would be wonderful in the United States to create sort of this axis of what they would probably consider, moderates, so between Israel, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Qatar to some extent, Egypt, in order to face Iran and almost have a deterrence belt towards Iran. So everyone would theoretically be happy. Note the one people that I haven't mentioned, the Palestinians. The Palestinians, without this moving towards a two-state reality, would be up in arms Hamas and up in arms verbally and diplomatically the Palestinian Authority. And that would be enough also to mount pressure back to Saudi Arabia. So it's all mixed together. And that's why I say Saudi Arabia knows that. It's very hard for me to see some avenue that Saudi Arabia goes forward with this without at least having in rhetoric, never mind in practice, at least in rhetoric, some commitment towards a Palestinian state from Israel.
I'm sure you were watching the White House just as closely as I was yesterday. You mentioned the two-state solution. In D.C. yesterday, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman told President Trump that Riyadh wants to join the Abraham Accords, but with that, he also mentioned wanting to secure a path toward a two-state solution. So Alon, if we think this through, what is the most likely path toward a two-state solution as things stand today?
So one of the very interesting things that happened between 2 weeks ago and the beginning of this week is the proposal of the United States to the UN Security Council with regards to what's the next step in Gaza. The draft was circulated 2 weeks ago and was voted on this week. And there were some pretty important changes that were made in the wording between the initial draft and this current resolution that was in fact approved. And with regards to a state, the most important change that was made was the fact that the United States added that the Palestinian Authority will undergo reforms based on what Trump wants or the Saudi-French proposal. It also removed Israel's veto. In the initial draft, it said to the satisfaction of the Board of Peace and Israel, and in the resolution, Israel disappeared from there. And then it also said that this will be something that if the Palestinian Authority actually does undergo those reforms, I'm quoting now, the conditions may finally be in place for a credible pathway to Palestinian self-determination and statehood. So what the United States is trying to do, I would imagine, is trying to show Saudi Arabia, look, we're on board. We are now the ones. The United States used to be the one vetoing resolutions in the UN Security Council that called for Palestinian state. We're the ones putting it forward. Russia and China had issues with this resolution. We're the ones putting it forward. So the United States is trying to signal very heavily to Saudi Arabia, we're with you on that being a final goal. That said, ultimately, at the end of the day, Israel is the one that needs to make that a reality on the ground if that were to happen. Like I said before, Israel is saying yes to anything Trump says, But on the ground, reality is different. Trump has also said that he wants to ensure that the ceasefire does not break down. Just today, there was a Palestinian attack in Khan Younis against IDF soldiers. No one hurt, no one injured. Israel carried out massive bombings in northern Gaza. 28 Palestinians are killed. Trump says he wants things to happen. Israel listens, but on the ground, reality is different. So the question then becomes, will Israel be able to actually make any moves towards this? No matter how much Trump pushes, what will Israel be able to do? And this relates already to internal Israeli politics. And there you have two problems. Number one, within the current coalition configuration, there is absolutely no hope of that happening. The coalition configuration right now is made up of three parties, led by Netanyahu, Smotrich, and Ben Gvir. Smotrich and Ben Gvir have said that anyone breathes a word of a Palestinian state, we are out of the coalition. They're putting forth resolutions for Israel to annex the Palestinian territories. Netanyahu at this point is not really leading, he's more following them. The other two parties are not in the coalition, they're voting from the outside. So in this government, it's very unlikely. But more broadly, there will be elections in Israel, scheduled elections about a year from now. But there is very little popular support for the idea of a Palestinian state. In Israel, while the world primarily has moved on to focusing on the Israel-Hamas war and what happened in Gaza, in Israel, the focus is still very much the October 7th attack. It's still very much the October 7th attack that happened 2 years ago. The view in Israel is the idea of withdrawing from more territory and giving the Palestinians the possibility of a military, like just for illustration, if you see this map behind me, that was the Gaza Strip. The West Bank, and this is where theoretically would also be part of the Palestinian state, the distance between this area in the West Bank and Tel Aviv and Israel's national airport is something like 20 miles, 20, 30 miles. That is roughly the distance that Hamas managed to invade from the Gaza Strip into southern Israel. So within Israel, that's the perception. The perception is not what are these macro geopolitical things that can be achieved, or do the Palestinians deserve self-determination, or should there be a state? The thinking tends to boil down to security and the scars of October 7th. I would be very surprised if anyone other than the two most left-wing dovish parties in Israel that collectively may get maybe a 10% of the Knesset seats, I would be surprised if any other political party is willing to mention a Palestinian state, because it's just very hard to sell that to the Israeli population at this point.
A live look at northern Israel. This viewpoint that we're looking at right now would be at the very, very tippy top of that map that you were just pointing at. This is the last question I have time to ask you tonight, Alon, as we take a live look at the White House. Just past 4 a.m. in Israel Standard Time, by the way, just past 9 p.m. Stateside. As you and I have alluded to, this week, the UN Security Council did vote to adopt a U.S. drafted resolution endorsing President Trump's plan to end the war in Gaza. It also is authorizing an international stabilization force for the Palestinian enclave. The resolution is seen as vital to legitimizing a transitional governance body and also reassuring countries that are considering sending troops to Gaza. So Alon, big picture, what's the most significant part of the UN adopting this? You texted me as soon as they were getting underway with the vote.
So there were two major parts to this resolution that are going to have implications for facts on the ground. Because like I said, the Palestinian state, that's important, that's political, that's extremely long term. The two most important things that happened that the resolution say with regards to what's going to happen de facto. One, the establishment of governing mechanisms. The Board of Peace is supposed to be established in Trump's 20-point plan. That's going to be an overarching transitional, it said government, they've changed it to administration, that is going to be in charge of rebuilding the Gaza Strip. According to Trump's 20-point plan, it was to be headed by Trump himself and former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair. Unclear if that's still the plan exactly and what's going to be. So the Board of Peace is to be established and other countries are going to be involved. Very obviously, it'll involve Turkey, Qatar, Egypt. We'll see who else. And the second thing is with that Board of Peace that is also going to train Palestinian police forces to be deployed in Gaza, there is the International Stabilization Force. That is supposed to be a mechanism that is made up of several armies, and it explicitly says of countries that are participating in the Board of Peace, which means that those countries that I mentioned, Turkey, Qatar, Egypt, may be sending troops to Gaza. This does not say that Israel has any say or veto in that. The United States has already made clear that it's going to do that with or without Israel's approval. And that stabilization force Those soldiers are supposed to take over the territory from Israel and proceed to disarm and demilitarize the Gaza Strip. The one last thing I'll say, very, very glaringly, what is missing from that resolution? The word Hamas and what happens if that disarming does not take place. It says that the International Stabilization Force will be there to disarm, demilitarize, secure humanitarian situation, and protect civilians. Does that mean that those forces are going to be expected to engage Hamas militarily if Hamas refuses to disarm? Does that mean they're supposed to protect civilians? What happens if there's a flare-up and Israel, again, starts bombing Gaza? Are they supposed to now engage with Israel? The resolution does not make that clear. It was a report today that Steve Witkoff was supposed to meet Khalil al-Hayya, the leader of Hamas's negotiating team and arguably the strongest leader in Hamas right now. That meeting was canceled, surprisingly. A lot of rumors that Israel pressured it to be canceled, but clearly to me, that was the United States coming to say, okay, but how are we working this out? Because that's what the stabilization force is going to happen, what's going to happen on the ground. So very important things happening with the Board of Peace, Palestinian Police Force, and International Stabilization Force. What it actually means, though, in terms of what's going to happen in the Gaza Strip, we still don't know at this point.
It remains to be seen, as you so often say. Professor Alon Burstein here with us tonight. Alon, how can people find your coverage, the Israel-Palestine Report?
So the Israel-Palestine Report, it's a YouTube channel. It's where I upload all kinds of content on the war on the Middle East. Last week, I uploaded a video that explained who are Palestinian prisoners and Israeli hostages. This week, there's a video coming out explaining where the name West Bank came from, and just weekly updates on the war. Feel free to join in, and I often have live forums too for questions and answers. Anyone who's interested in this region, always happy to see you.
And you can even drop a comment in the lives, and Alon will answer them. I've learned a lot from Alon over the years. All right, Alon, good to see you. We'll check in soon. Have a good night.
Thank you. Have a good night.